So here we are, the very last of these little videos and these little podcasts before. If you are on the YouTube channel, you will be seeing after this an interview with Jamie and Steve Margetson, followed by a game between rat catchers and morticians. And if you're on the podcast, you will just have the interview. But do feel free to pop across to the YouTube channel to join us for Don't Touch the Beard number 24, Morticians versus Rat Catchers, Season 4 rules. So, gents, looking at... let's start with the rat catchers, because I think that's a simpler answer. Looking at rat catchers in terms of Season 4, how do you think they've done? Was there any needs that you felt needed to be addressed that weren't? And kind of like, where do you think they'll sit? And I appreciate that last one is a bit nebulous because we've not seen every guild yet. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. So first of all, like, just where do you think how do you think they've done? Yeah, let's go from there.
I think they're closer to, I hate using concepts like this, but they're closer to where the design team wanted them to be. They were all about Snack Digger, which was, clearly not what was planned, and B, a bit random. It's like, here's a football team that does 4VP takeouts. Wait, what? So it's good to see them kind of refocus. And their morticians crossovers are also more focused on kind of what they do there as well. So, I still think Squeak's rubbish, but the rest of the team has had a nice buff, I think.
Connor?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think they kind of lost their defining characteristic of what Season 3 rats were. Anytime you saw them being played competitively, it was really all about Snack Diggers, and they've definitely lost that. However, Bonesaw, our Lord and Savior, is going to be a huge factor for these guys in Season 4. I think one of the reasons they didn't play the way they were is, could you imagine if you played a striking guild without a striker? Imagine trying to play like a scoring Blackheart team, but you're not allowed to take Mist. And that's basically the place rat catchers were, because as we know, Bonesaw was the universal mascot for balance of Season 3, and the Bonesaw memes were coming pretty thick throughout the season. And now I think he's a legitimately really dangerous striker. And Meditation working on Reverie is a massive difference. And the fact that he's 5-0 natural, so he doesn't just die. He doesn't need momentum to do what he does. And he's less likely to just have a football dervish kick ruin your entire turn.
Yep.
So I think, for me, I'm not sure whether or not their power level is higher or lower, because they lost such a powerful point expediation. And I think a lot of it's just going to come down to how much work Bonesaw can do.
Yeah.
And I, for one, have faith in our new leader.
The fact that 3 influence on your captain, which is fairly commonplace, has to be said, and 1 influence on Bonesaw can translate into 27 inches of goal threat, I think is fairly unprecedented. I'm having played against new rat catchers, I enjoyed the experience a lot more than sort of the previous rat trap style play style. It will get much more open game, much more flowing game. If you're watching this as a video, you'll get to see that game in a couple of videos time. Very, very interesting. Scourge still feels dangerous. He's still a beast. He's still incredibly resilient, if not more resilient now with the changes to Salve and the changes to Miasma. I like where they are. When we peek behind the curtains, such as it is, when we first got the cards for Season 4 to have a look at before we started doing these videos, I think, Connor, both you and I put rat catchers into our very bottom tier of where we felt they sort of sat competitively. Having now spent more time talking about them and also played against them, I don't think that's a fair thing, and I'd lift them off that slot. I still think they're one of the most fun guilds to play, just because of the amount of nonsense that you can do and the amount of lateral thinking and non-linear goal progression that they have. They're going to be seeing a lot of play. I can see they're tempting me. I think they're on my list of maybe teams for season 4. Although I freely admit that's not a particularly exclusive list.
No.
Yeah, I'm a man that likes to keep my options open, especially when it comes to bringing videos to the handy viewers, such as they are. Morticians, then. I, for months, have been worried that Morticians weren't really going to change, and that the world would sort of move on and evolve past them. We've seen, just to remind you, gents, we've seen the union, the engineers, the masons, the blacksmiths, and the farmers guilds be released beforehand, and it's fair to say, particularly with yesterday's releases, that the overall damage output seems to be going up, and naturally Mortician's health hasn't. However, this does serve as a very good way of stymieing their control. So it's all very well and good being able to control people, but if you're a glass cannon, you're still gonna feel it. But it was weird. I was having a chat with Jason a couple of months back, before we went to the playtest, and I was saying, I'm a bit worried about Morticians. I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen to them in season 4. I've got a horrible feeling they're going to be left behind. But I think it's fair to say they've seen vast changes to, there's 3 cards that are unaffected. So many good changes. The Scalpel is an entirely new beast. 2 new mascots. Bones
Striker.
Gained a striker. I mean, the hardest thing for me over the last few weeks has been watching the Free Cities draft and watching all of the Morticians going, vote for Lane, we need a new striker, and me having to sort of sit in my hands and go, no, we don't.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do, because Obulus and double striker is my dream, and I really want it to come true.
You leave off
and
my
just
space.
for that, I now don't.
Yeah. I think the changes to Cosset do a lot for her mobility whilst not removing her weakness. Veteran Graves is a beast, and Silence is more control on a squaddy than I think we've ever seen before. So the most difficult thing to do with Morticians right now is choosing a 12, quite frankly. I think they're in a wonderful place. Gents, any sort of hot takes, as it were, on what's happened to them?
I think the best thing about them now is that you have legitimate choices at every position. I think I've said it before in the Scalpel episodes. The captain choice used to be, 95% of the time it was, you can take Obulus and get away with it. Now there's genuinely, I think Scalpel would be better here.
Yeah.
You've got a choice at mascot, and okay, granted that one's more down to the fact they're both good than they were both rubbish. You've got a choice at which Graves you take. In terms of you've got Cosset and Pelage now, who are both legitimate decisions you can make. And that's kind of a theme all through the team. Whereas maybe, is it fair to say that wasn't the case previously?
Yeah, I'd say so.
You had a very strong top tier in there, and then everybody else was a fair bit below.
I don't know if that was necessarily true. I don't think they're a team like Farmers were in season 3, where there's a very clear hierarchy. But there were definitely some players that were a lot less seen, who I think you will see more. And I'm curious who your guys' gut drops from the 12 would be, because I bet we'd all have different ones.
I think we would. I think beforehand, sort of season 3 Morticians, just to answer Ben's question in there, was season 3 Morticians were probably, in my mind, the most toolboxy of all teams, in that I had a number of tools with which to do certain jobs, and if I was going to do a certain job, I would always reach for X. Whereas now, I think Ghast is just as much a centre of field control piece as Gasket, although be it in very different ways. Connor will now tell me he thinks he always was, but there we are.
He always was.
I have, if I want a glass cannon damage piece, I can now either reach for Pelage or Cosset. They both can fulfill that role, as well as doing other things, be that positional control or numerical control, but I have options within that role. So when you said you have options at positions, I don't think that was quite right. I think it's also options in role as well. The fact that if I'm playing against Morticians, you can kind of say, okay, so he's going to try and stop me doing this, so he will take that model. Whereas now, during that draft process, it'll be, he's going to try and stop me doing this, and he has an option of these models. And I think they're going to be an impossible team to second guess, because whereas before they had specialist tools to do things, now they have an absolute wide array of ways of achieving very, very similar effects. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see what people do and run with Morticians. I still maintain someone good is going to take Scalpel and watch the world burn. But I think you're going to see a lot more of Scalpel anyways, as you were alluding to, Ben. As to who I would personally drop from my 12, which I know is a question you two have been asking me at numerous points during these recordings. I have to say, personally, I would probably drop Cosset and Dirge, purely because I love Vile. I love new Vile Swarm, whether Vet Graves is in the lineup or not. A Furious model is a great way of generating momentum. And even if you just put one influence on him to scatter so that you can Furious straight back in, you're going to get momentum return. That's nice. Cosset, as you guys well know, and it's probably anyone that's watched my videos knows, I prefer a grindy takeout game rather than a glass cannon Cosset approach. So I can see those two sitting down. As for the next one, I don't know, frankly. It could be Pelage, again, purely because I don't like that sort of glass cannon-y model, but at the same time there are some matchups I really, really like her in. It could be Bonesaw, not because I think he's bad. Not because I think he's bad, I think he's phenomenal, but just I don't play that game. Like, that's not how I play Guild Ball, and perhaps it is how I should play Guild Ball, because I freely admit that a lot of Season 4 has forcing me or asking the question of me and how I play the game and what I should be doing around it. But there's, like you say, you could ask a dozen different Morticians players and they'd probably all come up with a different 3. So for me, I think certainly Cosset and Dirge, but after that, any cut is going to hurt, frankly.
Yeah.
Any cut is going to be, there will be games where you think, I could have done with that. And that's brilliant. That speaks volumes of good game design, as far as I'm concerned.
It's probably the most exciting part about Season 4. And I remember I was quite down on the change from a 10 to a 12 because I thought it would kill a lot of those conversations.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I still think I prefer the 10 idea. But man, has it been fun trying to figure out what 2 or 3 players to cut from a given team, because it always feels like there's 1 or 2 that just don't fit your style, regardless of team, that other people will like, but you just don't like for whatever reason, like Cosset in your case.
Cosset and Dirge.
But then that final cut is just always a killer.
Absolutely, and that's a great place to be in, and I'd much rather that. I know we had this very conversation when we were talking about the blog for Season 4 changes. Ben, you were a big advocate of, I've bought these toys, I want to bring my toys. Has your position on that changed?
Not really. I mean, I still don't. You're going to argue with me, I'm sure. But which player do I drop? I just don't see the point. If you're going to make kind of a compact roster, stick at 10. If you're going to let people bring all their toys, take the limit off, I'm still not sure what the point was of going to 12. And you know me, I'm a complete Steamforged fanboy these days. But I don't get that one. But okay. Hey, so be it.
Fair. So, gents, is there anything you think that you were surprised they didn't gain in this pass for Season 4?
Not really. I thought that original Graves might get a tweak. I think he was the model that wasn't touched. I was the most surprised by.
You expecting him to lose Tooled Up?
No, I didn't think he was actually going to lose Tooled Up, but he was such a good toolbox alongside Tooled Up that I wasn't sure how they were going to make Vet Graves compete with him. And I do think they have. I still prefer
100%.
original Graves, but that's more a stylistic thing. And I think, to be honest, running a no Graves lineup is something I would probably do a lot with Obulus now, because there's just so many good choices.
Sure.
So what I think is really interesting is I've always thought Obulus is one of the top 5 or so captains in the game. But he was a bit let down by some of the tools he had, and the fact that his alternate captain didn't really cover his weaknesses.
Yeah.
And I think neither of those are true anymore. And I think Morticians are still going to be really hard, if not harder, for new players, because I think new Scalpel is harder to play than old Scalpel.
Oh, 100%.
But this team is going to be scary in the hands of those good Morticians players.
Yeah. Yeah. So has the changes that we've seen to Morticians and Ratcatchers put them on your list of things to try out at the beginning of Season 4?
Morticians, yes. Granted, I've had a dabble with Morticians. 3 games, I scored 3 points across the 3 games combined. Just kind of sitting talking to you guys has got me thinking. The idea of coming at the game sideways has always appealed to me, and these guys definitely do that.
Ratcatchers, not so much.
Not so much. No, they feel a bit kind of limited in a style that's not really mine. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's fair. Connor?
For me, I think the Ratcatchers are it's not an aesthetic I like in any games. I never play that grimy, sewery look.
You're not a Nurgle guy. It's fair to say.
No, not really. I was always more of a Tzeentch guy.
That makes sense.
It's all corn all the time, which will surprise nobody.
That also is not surprising.
Hang on, we are not the Stealth GW podcast. That's Rollbetter's thing. We shouldn't steal their gimmick.
But Morticians, I've played a little bit of, and I gotta say, the Scalpel changes. She's great. She looks great. I have no interest in playing new Scalpel. She's not my style. I still have had a love affair with Obulus since the very beginning, and I just don't like the team around him. And I think this is the closest they've been to a team I want to play since Mist. And if they get Lane in the rookie draft, I will immediately be buying a Morticians team and running Obulus, Lane, Bonesaw, Vet, Hemlock, and Brain Pan and Memory, and going for 3-0 Morticians.
Nice. I think for me, I'm as a predominantly Morticians player, I'm very happy with the changes. I have to say, my sort of principal lineup of Obulus, Dirge, Casket, Brainpan, Graves, Skulk, or Veteran Hemlock still looks to be something that was entirely viable. Putting in Vileswarm for Dirge makes a lot of sense. In many ways, I still miss Avarice and Greed. I loved having 8 models in a 6 model game.
Only you.
But what I have to say is, for the first time since their release, Ratcatchers now are vying for my attention for a control team. I don't particularly feel the need to pick up any other control team outside of Morticians, be that Fish or Hunters, and yes, Fish are a control team. But Ratcatchers now, I think they have a much more elegant side to their gameplay, and in many ways they are more the Morticians minor guild than they were previously, which I really, really like. And they feel...
Yeah, I can agree with that.
They feel like a... This is going to sound detrimental, and I don't mean it to sound detrimental, but they feel like a stripped-down Morticians. They feel like a Morticians light. In that you have some control, some beaters, but they're a bit less control-y, or the beaters are a bit more straightforward. Like, everything that they do is in the same book as the Morticians, but is in like the earlier chapters. I'm not sure, and I don't mean any of that as an insult on the Ratcatchers. I think they're in a brilliant design place, but I can see, if I had a brand new player come to me and say up at my club, I love Morticians, I love the aesthetic, I love the idea of the playstyle, I've worked for my herd, I'd almost say to them, here's my Ratcatchers, go and have a couple of games with them, and that will give you an idea of where Morticians would take you, but that in a more in-depth way than Ratcatchers. And I really like that as a sort of minor to major guild mechanic between the two. They actually feel connected now, whereas perhaps before they looked the same. So anything anyone wants to add before we sign off and go straight into the developer interview with Jamie and Steve?
I just really hope someone that there's some good reps for Morticians at Worlds. I assume David Cameron's going to play them because he always does.
I think
and
Jared
I'm very
will
curious to see if Timmy does.
Yeah, I can see.
And who comes out of the US.
Yeah, fair, perfect.
So I think they are absolutely a factor on top tables.
100%.
I mean, they were before, but they are even more
so now. Even more so. So Ben, Connor, thank you very much for joining me and going through a vast number of 20 different cards. And thank you, if you're still here, handy listeners, handy viewers, such as you are. And as ever, I need a better outro.